March 18th. I'm so a happy belated St. Patrick's Day to all who celebrate. And this is episode number 27 for TMR. We have ASTA's Zane Kerby and ACTA's Wendy Paradis here to talk about advocacy for the travel trade and answer your questions. But first, I just have a few announcements before we welcome in. The first is that Speaker View is going to be the best viewing experience for you all, and the chat is open for any questions and comments. I want to also announce that we'll be back on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, with a special session. We're going to be welcoming Jennifer Wilson-Buttigieg back as a guest host for us, and she's going to be speaking with Dave Hilfman, the former Senior Vice President of Sales at United Airlines and the current Interim Executive Director at the Global Business Travel Association. We know that this huge pent-up demand for leisure travel is impossible to ignore at this point in time, and that leisure travel is going to be the industry's first segment to come back. We also know that the timeline for business travel isn't nearly as clear. And so we are happy to have Jennifer and Dave on in a couple of weeks to talk about that and to answer some questions about the future of business travel, both in the near term and the long term. We're going to drop the link in the chat now so you can get registered, and we'll get it out to you all after we wrap up here today too. I very much hope to see you all back here in a couple of weeks. I also know that we have some new attendees today, and I want to say welcome. If anyone missed our session a couple of weeks ago where we spoke about travel insurance with Kim Goldstein, that recording and all of our recordings from these episodes are available on our training tab on travelmarketreport.com and our YouTube page. And I'm going to drop the link to our YouTube page in the chat, but it's very easy to remember. It's just youtube.com/travelmarketreport. Okay, so everyone seems to be in from the waiting room, so I'm going to kick us off. Today, we are very happy and very lucky to welcome two of the busiest members of the travel trade over the past 12 months. Wendy Paradis, the president of the Association of Canadian Travel Agencies, and Zane Kerby, the president and CEO of the American Society for Travel Advisors. Both have led their trade organizations through one of the most tumultuous times in the industry's history. Both are still very much working in those fights, but we are lucky enough to have them give us some of their time today to talk about the importance of advocacy and other issues moving forward. So welcome, Wendy and Zane, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Dan. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Daniel.
So I'm going to do my best to direct questions to both of you today. I know we have a lot to cover, and I know we want to take some questions from the chat as well. But first, I wanted to give you a few minutes to tell us about your own experience over the last 12 months. And Zane, I was hoping we would start with you.
Sure, Daniel. I think the one word that I would use to describe the last 12 months is frenetic. You know, there's just a breakneck pace. You know, January of last year, our members were looking at a fifth consecutive year of record profits and record sales. And by March, everything was running in reverse, right? In the opposite direction. And months of commissions that were carefully curated from the vast majority of our members were lost overnight. And everyone's scrambling, trying to get their people home. And so that kind of kicked off a cascade with the speed in with which everything sort of ground to a halt and moved backwards, caused us to have to really kick into high gear as quickly as possible and use a lot of the tools that we had put in place over the last 6 or 7 years. You know, all of a sudden those tools became extremely, extremely important. The relationships that we built on Capitol Hill, the relationships that we built within the supplier community, and then obviously with our members. So it's been a frenetic 12 months. I don't know. I'm sure that Wendy would well, I don't know what she'll say. I don't want to speak for her, but it's certainly been a really challenging time, but also a time that ASTA has been able to show its value to the membership. And I think maybe some of the work that we've done has been thrust into the spotlight a little bit more than it had in maybe in previous times.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that, and I already see questions coming in the chat, and I promise we'll do our best to get to all of them as we go along today. But we do want to give Wendy the chance to tell us about what's been happening with ACTA in Canada over the last 12 months. Like Zane mentioned, I'm sure you had a similar experience, but I'm sure you've had a unique experience as well.
Sure. So I think, like Zane mentioned, that 2019 was a stellar year for travel. And so to go from having one of the best years on history to zero overnight I would use the word chaos, crisis, catastrophic. And I will be honest, for myself, the first 6 months of COVID is a bit of a blur. It was absolutely 24/7 advocacy. Things were moving and changing every single day, whether that was repatriating travelers and advocating for that, advocating for aid. It was definitely a blur, but we were working full out. One thing that our colleagues in ASTA said, so Eben, their key government relations person, I remember him saying early that we were hoping we would do all of this work, get this aid in place and be able to, sit back for a little bit, but it didn't turn out to be like that in either country, that we had to keep circling the government. And that the question of aid, which was the number one priority at first, that it was a relentless effort, certainly here in Canada, and then talking to our colleagues in the States, it seemed to be the same. So definitely chaos, chaotic, and crisis is what I would say.
Yeah, and I'm curious, you mentioned the journey you both have been on the last 12 months, and what are the priorities now? Wendy, you mentioned aid, and it hasn't been something that's came and went. It's been a nonstop battle, and I know the battles are ongoing for both ASTA and ACTA. But I mean, can you tell us a little bit about your priorities now and how you and your teams are working right now, communicating with government officials? What's top on the list, and what can travel advisors keep a lookout going forward? Wendy, if we can start again with you.
All right. Okay, so I think that in the case of Canada, that we are a northern country, of course. So I think that that plays into COVID. It seems a little bit differently than some other countries. Number one, that 90% of travel advisors in Canada are furloughed, and they've been almost furloughed for an entire year. We also have borders closed. You cannot travel in and out of Canada internationally unless it's for essential reasons. There is a mandatory 14-day quarantine, and very recently, a mandatory 3-day hotel stay. So with that backdrop, I'm sure you can guess that our number one priority is enhanced aid for travel agencies and travel advisors. We have a lot of subsidies in Canada that we've had for a year that have been extended to June 30th. We want those subsidies, like for instance, 75% wage subsidies for ITAs, so independent travel advisors, that the employment insurance type programs go right through to September. So our number one priority remains to be aid. Secondary, it's to work with the government to restart the travel industry.
Yeah, and Zane, I know ASTA's has a lot of similar priorities to ACTA, but I know we have in the United States there are the unique challenges as well and different circumstances. And I'm curious if you could tell us about ASTA's priorities right now going forward.
Sure. Well, they're very similar, Wendy. I think you enumerated them very clearly, and I think there's nothing new south of the border other than the fact that the new legislation, the American Recovery Act that the president just signed into law, actually does extend some of those important programs that were put in place last year, like the unemployment insurance that'll continue for $300 a week through September, which is a really good thing. People are in PPP loan, and the new ERTC credit that employers with employees are eligible for is actually really it's a really rich program. It's a really beneficial program. It'll cover about $28,000 worth of wages for each employee this year. So that was extended in the new American Recovery Act. It was going to end in June, and now it's going to end in December. So what we're really focused right now on, Daniel, is trying to get, and we've had some important success. Senator Hickenlooper, the new senator from Colorado, is going to put a bill forward on the floor in the coming weeks, And its provisions are going to actually provide more aid to businesses that are hard hit, such as ours. It builds on the PPP program in that it allows for a certain number of months of forgivable loan that are given. But if you're down 50%, then right now you'll get 5.5 times monthly payroll. And if you're down 75%, then you'll actually get 7.5 times payroll. The current payrolls that people are eligible for forgiveness are 2.5 times or 3.5 times for a couple of specific industries. So we really like this bill. We're going to be pushing for it hard at our legislative day in May, and think that again, it's really important to get special treatment for hard hit industries like ours. Can I make one more point there?
Yes.
And that's this: our elected officials here have tasked our CDC with public health, and that's fine. But if the CDC is going to continue to demonize travel, and specifically cruise travel, then, in my mind, you broke it, you bought it. And so you have a moral obligation to keep us whole and fed until such time as the CDC can remove those restrictions and stop demonizing travel and can let us earn a living.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that because I know that's a concern of a lot of advisors, particularly the cruise advisors. And we have a poll going up right now, just checking on how many members of ACTA and ASTA we have in the chat. But I do want to ask something first before we get into Transport Canada, and that's, you both speak about communicating with the government and pushing for the agendas that are best for your members. And I want to let you have the floor to talk about how both of your organizations work in those communications, because I know we have a lot of advisors who are members, but I know we have a lot of advisors who aren't members right now, and I just want to give you the chance to demonstrate the actual work that you do. And Wendy, I mean, if you want to kick us off on that one.
Okay, so I think that I'd like to continue off what Zane was saying about the CDC. Interesting, the CDC is not only important for the United States, it's important for Canada and the rest of the world. And so for an example of cruise, that we've been working with CLIA in Canada to really enhance the cruise message to our government. And so pretty well, there's been discussions with Transport Canada on a monthly basis. And what we've been told is, number one, that we are open to lifting the cruise ban in Canada once we see that those test cruises leave, I think it's Florida is what the plan is, and that we see metrics and success. And once we see that the CDC finalizes what those conditions are to restart. So we're open to restart the cruise industry when we can see some success. I'm disappointed to say that Canada definitely will not be a leader in this, in that they will want to see success before we move forward. But one thing that we are doing is the cruise ban, particularly for the West Coast and the Alaska cruise season. And so our ask of government is to allow, at the very minimum, technical stops in 2021, because we know how difficult it is. A cruise line, an airline just can't turn it on and start the next day, so that they need to have the ability to plan. So the priority for us is technical stops, and that really means letters. It means telephone meetings. It means Zoom meetings. It means circling all the other members of parliament. So it's a quite complex and very repetitive process to get things percolating to the top where you can actually get change.
Yeah, and I think, I know we're going to have a lot of questions about the cruise issue in the chat, but Zane, one question that just came in that I'm wondering if you can answer is that we have a guest attendee wondering if there's what are the opportunities for ASTA membership right now? Are there, his or her membership's up at the end of the month and they want to rejoin, and they're wondering if there's any discounts or what other ways they can sort of seek to keep their membership going with ASTA.
ASTA membership is fairly inexpensive. I think it's $199 for the year for most of our small operators. And then the really big guys in our association, the American Expresses of the world, pay tens of thousands of dollars to join. So have this good man give me a call, and we'll figure something out.
Okay.
I just want to pick up on something that Wendy is saying, and it's really goes back to the purpose of the association. The purpose of an association is you have to answer the fundamental question: are there things that are important enough that we have to link arms and do them together? And the answer to that question is yes. And if you don't think there are things, it's easy to get seduced by the idea that, oh, I'm a big, strong business person. I can do things myself. I can handle my business myself. And that's a naive perspective. I'll just say it out loud, because the first thing is you're relying on the benevolence of others to determine the tax, the regulatory, and the business environment that you are operating in. I'll say that again. You're relying on the benevolence of others to set the rules of the road for the tax, the regulatory, and the business environment that you live in. And that, I think, is a very it's a strange place to kind of talk yourself into, because if you ignore those things, if you put your head in the sand, then they can rise up and have a dramatic impact on your ability to do business. I have 100 examples pre-COVID of ASTA working to level the playing field for our members, to make sure that we don't get taxed out of business, to make sure that we keep preferential tax treatments, to make sure that local governments aren't scouring around looking for revenue from us. I mean, there's just an enormous number of things that trade associations do, and you have to link arms to do them. The reason is because our governments, and I don't know what it's like in Canada, but our government is not designed to respond to you individually.
Yes,
it's just not. It's designed to respond to people who represent groups. They want to know what the entire group thinks. They want to know what that's why all the big important industries have formed an association here in Washington. Everyone you can think of, the petroleum folks, the airlines, the pilots, everyone has. There are 390 lobbyists walking around Capitol Hill for the airlines every single day. And you know what they have? That they take care of the airlines. They take care of their industry. Now, we have to have a voice in order to make sure that key legislators and regulators here in Washington understand the issues that we face that are independent of what other sectors face.
I think to add that, Zane, what's really important is that we also are speaking with one voice. And one of the things that for advocating for years, that the government is really looking for one voice that represents the industry. And if they get 15 or 50 answers from a community, then it's very confusing to them. And I can tell you that one member of parliament says, if we don't hear from the industry, then we have to ask our mothers, like get it together type thing. And so I think that one strong voice with a consistent message is really vital.
Wendy, you're exactly right. And I would just add to that not only if they're hearing more than one voice from the same industry asking for different things, it's so easy to ignore. And that's exactly what they do. They're like, these people don't have their act together and they're asking for different things. So let's just ignore them until they get together.
Right.
Yeah, and going off of that, Zane, the CARES Act sort of showed the power of advocacy because the ticketing agents was the only particular profession mentioned in the clauses in the beginning of the CARES Act, which were huge for ASTA and huge for the trade community. But I want to give you each a chance to talk about, aside from the battles you've faced over the last year, what other battles have you faced over the past few years pre-COVID that demonstrate the value of both organizations going forward? And Wendy, I was hoping we could start with you on this one.
Okay, so I think that a long time ago, before COVID, that certainly the focus has been similar in that it is really government ensuring that there's as little regulation or smart regulation. So in Canada, we are, I would say, typically a morally highly regulated country, and some provinces more than others, to the point where it gets ridiculous. And so one of our key roles is to speak on behalf of travel advisors and travel agencies in really trying to have smart regulations or smart processes so that we actually are free to do business. An example that I know that was really key in the United States in 2017, we had one of our provincial governments who wanted independent travel advisors to become employees. So we actually had to fight that fight. We were successful. However, it's one of the issues that we look at on a monthly basis because it pops up on and on. So it's not like we talked about COVID, it's not something that we say, okay, that's great, we're done, that we need to be acutely aware of some of these issues that continue to raise and can have a devastating effect on the industry. Another priority for ACTA, and where we've had definitely some success, is that unlike the United States, that we use IATA instead of ARC when it comes to BSP processing and equality between airlines and travel agencies. So we are the second largest region in the world outside of Europe. And so we unfortunately, that portfolio is relentless. So we are always on that to ensure that things like debit memos are improved for travel agencies and travel advisors. Things like now we'll get technical remittance holding capacity. What I'll say is some of the work that we do is very technical, complicated, and sometimes boring, but it is incredibly important to a travel advisor and travel agency. And so one of our goals is to focus on those regulations, make you as free as possible to do your job, focusing on selling and servicing your clients. So those are just a couple of examples where we've been very successful in Canada.
Yeah, and Zane, I know ASTA's had a similar streak of wins recently too, pre-COVID as well.
Yeah, way back in 2019, Daniel, when life was normal. The state of California, we got swept up in their regulatory zeal to try to regulate the gig economy, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. And they basically outlawed the independent contractor model that we live and work very happily under. And so we had to go at that point, you wanted a National Trade Association to send our lawyer and a staffer to all 40 state senators' offices with the information that they needed. You wanted, our good board members to also fly out there and talk to legislators and us to put a grassroots campaign together. You needed those things in place because the important part is that because we got an exemption to AB5 in California and preserve the business model for travel advisors in the state, the really important thing is that we won there, so that the next 5 very democratic blue states that are up for regulating the gig economy, including Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York, they're going to base their model off of California's. So hopefully we won't have nearly as big a fight in those next states again when things return to normal. That's just one example of what we do. The other thing is, states are before the pandemic started, states were $2 trillion in debt, trillion with a T, and they're constantly scouring around looking for ways to raise revenue so they can balance their books. Right? They're not like the federal government; they don't get to just print money when they want to. They have to keep their bond rating up in order to be able to borrow money to do things they want to do. So with that, you get all kinds of crazy ideas. The state of Utah decided, again in 2019, we're going to tax travel for 6% for any travel that's sold within our state. Well, we had to go over to the Capitol Hill in the Utah State Capitol and say, do you realize that you're making travel 6% more expensive in your state? So people will just call a travel advisor in neighboring states in Nevada or Colorado and buy travel there instead to save 6%. And on a $6,000 cruise, they'll easily call another state. So you're just driving travel away from your state, and you're driving sales away from your state. And obviously they abandoned that silly idea. So they're just I'll just give you one other quick example, and that's this. The FAA reauthorization bill comes about every 5 years, and it gives the FAA, it authorizes the FAA to collect ticket taxes on airline tickets. And the government doesn't miss many chances to feed. So this is a must-pass bill in Congress. Well, the last bill that went, it had language in it that said, listen, if you're a travel advisor, you need to call people up and tell them all the things that they're not allowed to take on a plane. And you need to get their acknowledgement that they heard you and that they agree they're not bringing these things on a plane. And you need to put a little checkbox. You acknowledge that they acknowledge these things, that they talk to you. So we gained it out, and it's something like, I don't know, $40 million a month in talk time and in training and in liability. It was just a mess. And so, you know, we went to senators on Capitol and said, this is a bad idea. It's going to put us at a terrible disadvantage to online players. And it's going to hurt our ability to do business. It's going to add all this time and complexity and liability of Utah as well. Said, yeah, that's crazy. Let's put a carve out for travel advisors. Let's just make this something that you can send people in the confirmation letter. And though it might seem like a small thing, we avoided an enormous amount of regulation, enormous amount of talk time lost and aggravation. Can you imagine you're dealing with someone that, you know, maybe someone's administrative assistant that who's booking a ticket for them, and you have to say, well, wait a minute, put them on the phone now so they can listen to the list of things that they can't bring on a plane. I have to get their approval, not yours, the actual person who's flying. It's just a mess. So anyway, that's what I meant when I said earlier, is that the rules of the road are constantly changing. They're being updated all the time. And if you don't have a national association that's looking out for these things, monitoring them and pushing back where needed, then you're gonna have to deal with them on your own.
Yeah, and I know we've had a lot of questions in the chat. I know Rick Artis is in the chat helping some people with finding their local ASTA chapter, and I see some ACTA members too, Wendy, in there. In a way, recruiting people to join ACTA, which is a great thing. But a question came in during the week, and this is for you, Wendy, that I was hoping you would take some time to answer. And it was specifically about Canadian Airlines and them their inability to refund some money for flights canceled because of COVID. And I know this is a concern for a lot of your members, and I was hoping you would take a couple of minutes to address it.
All right. So early in the pandemic, that the Canadian government made the decision, and some other governments did this as well, but the Canadian government made the decision, along with some of the provinces, that they were going to freeze some decisions so that things could settle down a little bit. And one of those decisions was around refunds. And so what ended up happening in Canada is that for the most part, airlines and tour operators issued future travel vouchers. The vast majority of transactions moved to a future travel voucher. And that was pretty well sanctioned by the federal government. And it was sanctioned by, for instance, our largest province, the travel regulator, or the Ontario government. And so the whole goal of that was to have things settle down, see how things would move forward. I think at the beginning, no one expected that COVID would be lasting for a year. And so jump forward, and what has happened is that, so in Canada, there's been no mandate. It's been future travel vouchers. However, the consumer has spoken loud and clear to the government, especially at the beginning, and they would like their refunds. And the Canadian government probably, it's been at least, I'm going to say 3 months ago, has announced that there will be consumer refunds, and that any aid to airlines will be based on mandatory refunds. And so since then, that the Canadian government and the Canadian airlines have been negotiating an aid package. So unlike the United States, where the aid package came out, I think back in early March last year, maybe even February, the first one, that an aid package to Canadian airlines has not been fully negotiated. So we're expecting that to happen anytime soon, and that we know the government has stated that any aid will be dependent on consumer refunds. So from a travel advisor and a travel agency perspective, that our ask of the government for months now has been that any aid that is given to an airline or tour operator, it must include travel agent commission protection. And so in that case, and it's not over until they actually pass the law, but we have been told time and time again by the federal government, by Transport Canada, by Finance, we have heard your message loud and clear. As you know, this pandemic has adversely affected female workers more than male workers. So we've been lobbying the Women's Directorate as well. And then, of course, like the United States, we have a lot of independent travel advisors in Canada. And really, for mandated refunds to happen now, it would literally be going into 2019 bookings and pulling money out of their pockets. So really, what you used your commissions for to pay for your rent or your food on your table, that there's a possibility that you would have to pay that money back, which we know would be devastating. And so that is the refund story in Canada. We do believe it's imminent. And then what we are looking for is that the consumer is made whole, that the airlines receive the aid that they need, and that travel agencies and travel advisors are protected as well.
Yeah, and I think I think I'm getting a little echo from somebody. One of my team members will fix that. But we had some questions in the chat about communicating with both of you two, Wendy and Zane. And I know there's ASTA and ACTA reps hanging out in the chat, so I'm sure they'll be in touch to get those communications to the advisors. But Zane, we had a question come in from a Michigan-based travel advisor recently, and it's Catherine Roosevelt, and she wants to know about a third round of PPP, if you have any updates on that. She says she's already gone through her money from the first two rounds, and she's not sure when the sufficient income recovery will come, and she's wondering if you have any guidance on any of that going forward.
Yeah, the first thing I'd tell Catherine is to make sure that she's maxed out on our ERTC credit as well. I don't know if she's a sole proprietor or if she has employees. If she does, she counts as an employee herself as well, up to $28,000 a year. So make sure she's maxing out our ERTCs. We're pushing really hard. We know there's going to be another COVID relief package. Two hopes, really. One is that there will be money left over in the current round of PPP that can be redistributed for a third draw for folks. And if not, again, hopefully one of these provisions, like Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado, will come through in the next COVID relief bill, which will give, again, hard-hit businesses like ours a larger draw in a dedicated pool of funding. So we're actually taking out, we have several things going on. We obviously have the direct lobbying efforts that are supported by the ASTA PAC. So we've amassed several $100,000 that we can then parse out to different legislators, and usually increments of $1,000 to $5,000 to $10,000, depending on the legislator and their influence. We give 50-50 Democrat, Republican, 50-50 House, Senate. We're definitely a very bipartisan group, but we use that money to talk to legislators about the issues that we have. And obviously aid and more aid is an extremely important thing for us to do. Hopefully one of Senator Hickenlooper's provisions will make it into this next round of COVID relief. But the other thing that in addition to the direct things the direct meetings that we have with legislators, we have a lobbying firm, KDCR, that has a tremendous pool and influence with legislators here. We have them on tap, and then we also organize our grassroots campaigns. But something new that we're trying as well is there's a singular publication here in Washington that's read very widely and respected. It's called Politico. And it's kind of like the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the New York Times all rolled into one. And it's read by 90% of all legislators and like 100% of all legislative staff. And so in recognition of what's going on and how we need to sort of leave it all on the field and make sure we leave no stone unturned, we've entered into a relationship with Politico. We're geo-targeting legislators, particularly those on the House transportation side and in the transportation Senate as well, on important committees of ours. And they're going to be hit with advertising over the month of May when they're going to be negotiating this next COVID relief package that says things like, do you know that 60% of Americans believe that you're not doing enough for small business owners like travel advisors? Did you know that 70% of people out there feel like the airlines got theirs, but small travel airline businesses have not been adequately managed and helped in this time? So we're going to hit them really, really hard. In fact, we're going to get about 3 million impressions on Apple News. So hopefully, when you wake up, if you have an Apple device, you'll be able to see ASTA's work with Politico.
Just going off that, I think we have a little bit of delay on Zane's video, but going off that, Wendy, I was hoping you could talk about what Zane mentioned in those ads, that there does seem to be an element of not only communication with government representatives, but also education with government representatives because of the travel trade's size and because of how what kind of niche business it's become in some areas of the world. Is there a level of education you need to undergo when you're speaking to government representatives?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I will say is that with this current crisis, that although the legislatures don't understand the travel industry, we've had to have several meetings around education. To Zane's point, we use a lot of social media that is specifically being directed to the members of parliament. We also have a couple of publications. One's called The Hill that we actually make sure that that our messaging is in there. But certainly they do not understand the travel industry very well. And one of the things that's really important is that when we leave a meeting, or when they leave one of our submissions, that they then have the mining industry coming in, they have the finance industry coming in. So we need to really educate our lawmakers in a very succinct, practical way, because our messaging is being, there's competition with all of these other industries. Zane made the point about the terminology, the hardest hit. The hardest hit is really in Canada, a bit like sector-specific aid. So pretty well when the government's talking about hardest hit industries, they're talking about travel and tourism and hospitality. So to ensure that we're using language that the government uses that they can relate to is very important as well. But it is a multi-pronged approach to get your message above all of those other industries, because everybody's in there fighting for their time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what a lot of members have to understand too, is it is a competition for time amongst lawmakers. And I see Zane has popped out. I know there were some video issues, so hopefully we'll get him back in. Oh, I see him now. So I did something we spoke about Tuesday, as we have about 15 minutes left. So just a reminder, if you have a specific question, we're going to have a couple minutes at the end to answer them. So please drop them in the chat. But something the three of us spoke about at a prep call was just the differences and the similarities between the two countries. We know you both head up similar organizations, but there are different challenges, and there's also similar things that you guys that you two do the same way. And I want to give you some time to talk about that, talk about what you think the biggest differences are between the two countries, and what you think the biggest differences are in your lobbying efforts. And Zane, because you just came back in, if you want to grab that question first, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on the differences between lobbying in U.S. versus Canada. I will tell you though that one of the places where these things intersect is certainly with the Canadian decision to close the sport. And I know that Wendy spoke about that a little earlier. I do want to pick up on that because we're working. There's sort of three. Actually, there's four. I'll talk about the first. There's a legislative fix, right? There's a diplomatic fix and there's a regulatory fix. The regulatory fix would be the CDC kind of removing the ban on cruising, and then perhaps the the Canadian government doing the same, removing the restriction on closing its ports. The legislative fix would be for us in the United States to remove the PVSA or suspend the PVSA, the Passenger Vessel Services Act, which is a companion thing to the Jones Act, which says that a foreign flag ship has to make an international stop before it can come back into a U.S. port. And then, there's a diplomatic fix, which be, the Canadian government just deciding that they would allow these technical stops that Wendy spoke about. But there's a fourth side of this. There's a fourth fix to this that I think that governments don't anticipate, and that's that businesses have to make decisions and have to make hard decisions. And I don't know what they're planning to do, but if I were sitting at the head of a cruise line that was being told that it couldn't sail out of, or that due to a technicality that it was unable to host an entire season of Alaskan cruising, and the entire fall season of Caribbean cruising is in jeopardy. Well, I might say, our new home is the Bahamas. So if you want to take a Caribbean cruise, why don't we start in the Bahamas, everybody? You want to cruise? Fly there. My sense is the Bahamian government would be very happy with that decision. And so we hope that we're working all the trapdoors. We certainly stand firmly with the Alaskan Republican contingency legislators there who have really put pressure on and want the PVSA suspended. We certainly stand with them. We want that to happen. We'd love for Canada to allow technical stops. But if not, there are other ways to accomplish this that maybe governments in both places won't like the answers.
Yeah, Wendy, do you want to jump in there too?
I think that Zane covered off a lot there. I think the other element, and maybe where there's some similarities and perhaps differences, is that not only is it politicians and the CDC and Health Canada, but it's also consumer sentiment, which politicians really listen to. And so I think that as trade associations and travel agency and travel advisor businesses, that we need to be cognizant of that, and we absolutely need to be in Canada. So right now, we know that over 90% of Canadians want the US border to remain closed until more Canadians are vaccinated. We know that 80% of Canadians want to travel and they want to travel internationally, but it's based on vaccine rollout. And so I think that when we're talking about, for instance, the example of cruising, whether that's the West Coast or the East Coast, one of the constituents that we also need to pay attention to and really show them success and some good information and data is that we need to have consumers or our residents in both countries, particularly, I can only speak for Canada, that we need consumers and government to be feeling better, and we need to ensure that we are communicating those good news stories, the right data versus all of the incorrect news feeds that we see out there.
And I know this might be a difficult question to answer, but what are your expectations for that decision changing over the next few months? Is it something you both are just taking day to day, or is it something that you have a deadline or pressure on or dates in mind? Wendy, since you were speaking last, do you want to jump on that one?
So I think that really one of the, and I'm confused about this myself, but this whole idea of some of these test cruising and that they actually embark and we see success. So we have been advised, certainly by the Canadian stakeholders that we've spoken to, is that where's the data? Where's that success? Number one, I think that when the cruise ban came in place, which was back in February, both CLIA and ACTA, we were expecting the delay to go to May 31st. And we were actually quite shocked and surprised that it actually went right to February. at that time, we were in, the deep winter in Canada, and that we don't make vaccines in Canada. So the millions of vaccines that we were expecting were not arriving. And so I think that decision back in February, there was all kinds of different aspects to that, or elements. And now what a difference 4 weeks has made, because we are in, even though there's a third wave, we are in a much better place as far as having some of those elements in place. As far as the change coming in 2021, I think it's possible later in the season, but I think it is very dependent on what is going on with the overall cruise industry and some of these pilot and test cruises, which I understand, and maybe Zane can pop in here, have that the cruise season out of the United States has been delayed further. And so I think, as I mentioned, that up in Canada, that our government's not going to be the trailblazer on this, that we really are waiting to see those test cruises at least start. Zane, maybe you have some insight there?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, we feel like cruising has been unnecessarily demonized. And if you would have told me last February that cruise ships would be shut down in March, and that basically not allowed, that the provisional no sail order would turn into a conditional no sail order last October, and that there's still no meaningful cruise ships leaving the United States, the two busiest ports in the world, in Fort Lauderdale and Miami, I would have told you you're crazy. The fact is that 1 million people are going through TSA checkpoints every day right now. And while we're down to between 50 and 60% of normal traffic, we feel very strongly that people should be given the option and the opportunity to cruise. And I'm not a public health expert, but it feels like everything else has been open here in the United States. Restaurants are open, gyms are open, live venues are open. People have been able to go to 20,000 people are able to go to a football game. So why has cruising been singled out as the only thing that has been unable to even try to get back on its feet? And we feel very passionate about this. I spoke with Kelly Craig earlier this week over at CLIA, and we certainly are working in tandem with them on messaging. But I want an immediate resumption of cruise, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that our members can sell cruising and get people back out on the high seas.
Yeah, just going off of that, Zane, it seems that here I'm in New York, and we were one of the hardest hit states by COVID, and we're getting news every day that things are opening at capacity. So it is something to think about, and something to think about why the cruise industry is in the situation it is in. But so we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to say to everyone, thank you for joining us today. But I want to give Wendy and I want to give Zane just a last opportunity to talk about your organizations, and talk about why it's so important, if you're a travel agency owner, if you're a travel advisor, to join the organizations going forward, and anything else that you want to add to the conversation. Wendy, do you want to kick us off for this one?
Sure. So I think we talked a lot about on this Zoom call about really the importance of advocacy and the ability to speak as one voice. The more members that we have that join their trade association, the more effective that we can be. We are lobbying on a federal and in Canada, a provincial level, and it is staggering the amount of work. So the more resources we have to do that, the better. To Zane's point earlier, that there are, of course, many travel advisors and travel agencies in Canada who are active members, but there are far too many who rely on their colleagues in the industry to foot that bill, and also to be part of committees, et cetera. So I think that we've talked about the advocacy. In the case of ACTA, our priority is also education. We are the certifying body in Canada for the travel counselor certification program, and that I think that is a really important element for ACTA professionalism of the industry. And then our third priority is really to promote the value of working with a professional travel advisor. And I think that is clearer in 2021 than it has ever been in the history of time. And so we're actually very confident in the future of this career and this profession. The one thing that I want to finalize my comments about is really the tremendous effort that we've had from travel advisors, from consortia leaders, from small travel agency owners, from travel agency presidents of multinational organizations. The amount of effort for lobbying in Canada by travel advisors and travel agent leaders, it has been unbelievable. And so for everyone who's on the call that's from Canada, I'd just like to do a huge shout out to you on the impact that you're having, and to thank you for all of your efforts. We are speaking with one voice. They're using all of the ACTA submissions, and I'm very proud of the impact that the thousands of us have been able to make in Canada. So thank you very much.
Zane, do you want to have some final words?
I think Wendy said it perfectly. The only thing I'd add to it is that, ASTA is the nerve center that responds to the pain that you feel. And so just as she said, when you decide to join the association, you add yourself as a voice within that association, and also make it stronger, make that nerve center stronger and more able to deal with the world that we find around us. It's complicated. Travel is complicated. It's going to be more complicated, which thrusts the travel advisor into a singular and central role. It's really important to belong to your trade association for that reason. The other thing is the last thing I'll say is reputational management. And the association, I'm so proud. When I got here 8 years ago, we were being defined by our enemies and by a technology sort of heavy press that was saying that travel advisors didn't matter anymore, that they've been replaced by computers, and just leave them for dead. And over the last 8 years, we have changed that tone. We're working on a CBS story right now on showing the effects, to Wendy's earlier point, the effects that the pandemic has had on small female-owned businesses. And to think about the Boston Globe, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the places where we're getting quoted now, where we're being asked to be contributors, is a really important thing to help us take back the pen and define our role as an important role serving the traveling public. So that's a really important, another great reason to join your National Trade Association. And I echo everything that Wendy said. It was a real pleasure to be on with you today, Daniel, and you, Wendy. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, we're getting a lot of great comments in the chat, a lot of thank yous to both of you, not only for the hour we spent today, but for what has happened over the last year with you and your organization. So I want to echo that to both of you, say thank you so much for joining us today and answering everyone's questions. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining us. I hope to see you back in 2 weeks with Jennifer Wilson and Dave Hilfman. And until then, I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. And I hope to see you all